In this episode, I'm going to chat with Andrew Clark, founder of Logistics Help. Andrew is on a mission to help small to mid-sized enterprises implement high-performance tactics and technology to their supply chain so that they can scale without stress. Andrew is passionate about logistics and how getting this element right in business can help elevate them to the next level. In this conversation, we will discuss coronavirus and e-commerce, sell more with less stock, and speed sells. So, without further ado, Andrew, how's it going?
It is going great, Kyle. Really pleased to talk with you in the morning Australian time.
It's afternoon in US time. It's actually evening time, but so much fun. Again, apologies for scheduling this. I was so mixed up with everything, but it's great. It's awesome
Totally
that you
fine.
joined and everything. So for the audience,
really glad to be here.
Awesome. So for the audience, talk a little bit about yourself. Give them a little background, kind of what you've been doing, what's Logistics Help, and sort of your background too.
Yeah, so I actually started out in footwear manufacturing years ago. I left uni. I did a science degree at uni and wanted to go and work for a business, and discovered that I really fell in love with operations management, which was not something that I even knew existed at university. Otherwise, maybe I should have studied that. And originally, I wanted to be in manufacturing. So that was back in the 80s, but I quickly realised that manufacturing was dying. At that period, that was when all of the big outsourcing push was happening, and companies were sending all the manufacturing overseas. So I thought, I really need a career change and an industry change. So I ended up moving into pharmaceutical manufacturing in Australia with Baxter Healthcare, which is a big US global company. I'm sure you'd be familiar with them.
Right.
And that was really where I made my foundational learning in warehousing and distribution and logistics, and also system implementation. Went through a number of iterations in my work there doing the implementation of warehouse management systems, and really got to understand the value of a good computer system and how it can actually help the physical operations within a business. And I really fell in love with being that intermediary between the operations people and the IT people, right? Because IT people, they're great, but sometimes the how they conceive things is not directly applicable to the real world. So you kind of need that. You need that balance, and often a lot of operations people are just not good at systematizing and understanding the underlying processes and how IT might actually help them. So I kind of, that's sort of where I forged my career in developing expertise around that, and the managing of operations into a system and a process.
That's fascinating.
I really enjoyed that. So. Yeah. And then I went to work for as the logistics manager with a pharmaceutical distributor. So this was all in the hospital supply industry, in that kind of in that realm.
Right.
And then that business got sold into a joint venture, and I ended up making redundant. So they merged two companies, and mergers and acquisitions don't always go well for the merged business. So I found myself out in the world trying to sort of figure out what was next. And I ended up working for a consulting business in Australia called Logistics Bureau, and cut my teeth as a consultant there, and discovered that I actually really liked that, and I had actually developed really good experience in my time in the sort of pharmaceutical and healthcare industry, and the skills that I developed were actually quite widely applicable to logistics businesses generally. So I drifted sort of through a number of subcontract roles with as a consultant, and also working on doing project work. And then I thought, I've got to build my own business. I've got to take what I know and try and turn that into a brand and into a business. And then that's really when Logistics Help was born. And not being a business native sort of person, that was a bit of a hard journey to go from being a technical person into actually being someone who can actually own and run a business and make it something else other than just self-employment. Although self-employment is hard enough, I've got to say, just getting yourself out of working in the corporate world and then sort of finding regular work as an independent is actually a pretty hard road to hoe just in itself. So I did that, and then as time has gone on, that vision of what I can do with the business has just grown and has grown. I've formed some key strategic partnership with some software developers, and that is an ongoing process. And so where I'm really going now is looking at how I can best serve the small and medium tier of business, which is really underserved with logistics expertise. The consultants, they all work up in the big level. And the people with the expertise, like the really good operations guys, they're all working for big companies. So oftentimes what happens is the warehouse manager in a typical small or medium business is the last store person standing, right? He's the guy who is still there when everyone else, has left or got sacked or whatever, or it's someone's brother who's just helping out, or so it's not that they're not good people. It's just that they're not operations guys. They've not had big business experience. They don't understand the process. They don't understand what a good warehouse actually looks like.
Yeah.
So
they're interns. They were the good workers. We see the exact same thing. It's the guy that's like, hey, man, this guy's just good, or the gal, like everyone. It's just like, hey, we really like this person. They get the job done, and that's all it really is. But yeah, you're 100% right. We see that all the time.
Yeah. So really, what I'm trying to do is go, well, how can I drag two things? One, bring that expertise, from the big business down to the sort of smaller scale of the business, and they really, really need it, right? Because they have exactly the same set of problems, just at lower volume.
Right.
In fact, sometimes the complexity of a small business is much bigger. A lot of big businesses are just big. They're not necessarily complex businesses. They're just churning out millions and millions of products. So with smaller business, because they tend to be a lot more diverse, often they actually have more complex operations and actually need more sophistication than a big business. But you can go out and you can hire an accountant or a lawyer or or an IT guy, right? But going out and hiring a logistics expert, very, very difficult, right? They basically don't exist in that mid tier. They're all sort of working, they're big business advisory people, and a lot of the people that tend to be consultants are, they're big supply chain advisory sort of people, rather than how do I implement your system? How do I redesign your warehouse? How do I get your processes more efficient? Now, I've always been an operations efficiency process guy. And so I think I kind of have the right skill set to go into those small and medium businesses to help them deliver results. And you combine that with the big trend that's going on at the moment with cloud software that is opening up extraordinary, like high level functionality easily to the SME world. Like a lot of SME businesses have more sophisticated IT infrastructure than big businesses who are stuck with, moribund old systems. They're not in the cloud. They're not connected. Like nothing works. So they're forever in the thrall of the IT developers trying to fix things that are going wrong with their system, or trying to build new connections and, connect their old legacy ERP up to the website so they can actually, sell online. Whereas now, you've got Shopify, you've got a web store, you connect that with Xero, you've got an online business. You want to do some of your own sort of warehousing things, you get an inventory management system, and that helps you. Then the next level sort of is the warehouse management system side of things, and that's kind of where I'm going, right, to bring the technology. And the two key technologies that a lot of businesses lack are warehouse management systems and inventory planning systems. And that's really where a lot of my focus is going to be on the next few years, is bringing those technologies in the cloud to the e-commerce world, the small sellers and the businesses that are desperate to get the kind of improvement in technology and efficiency, because business is so competitive and it's so sharp out there that they just need the best they can possibly get. So that's where I'm going, to try and bring those technologies into that world.
It's where it's at. I mean, it's interesting. It's a lot of what we're doing here too. It's fascinating, like you say, of who kind of runs in the SME, kind of who's running logistics in SME, and who's kind of working on the warehouse, and where their technology is, because it is more sophisticated a lot of times than enterprise, because they can get the new stuff, they can experiment with the stuff. But at the same time, it's I think why one of the really cool things about having you on the show is what we both kind of believe in educating this industry and bringing the resources out into the open, and not just having it be something that's kind of enterprise and stuff like that. So let's talk about some of that stuff. And I think we got to talk about the big elephant in the room. coronavirus. It's everywhere, unfortunately, as much as at this point people are sick of hearing about it. What we're going to try to do is discuss it more from the logistics point of view, which I think is a little more
Mm.
unique. So let's just talk about it. I mean, we're a U.S. based podcast. So what was the experience like over in Australia, kind of where you're based? I'm just a little interested in that. What was some of
Sure.
how was it? We shut down.
Yeah.
We're still going crazy about the damn thing. Instead of solving it like we should have, we are having all the fun in the world right now and fun stuff. But how was it in
Yeah.
Australia?
Yeah. It's so, look, I think our experience in Australia has been, on the whole, better than a lot of the rest of the world. Whereas there's been, I think we're up to like 1 million deaths or something globally now. It might even be more than that. Like it's just huge. Australia, we've had just over 100 deaths from coronavirus. So because I don't know, Australia was quite isolated from the rest of the world. So we often lag a little bit in terms of the impact of global events happening on Australia, even though you've still got the international tourism, right? So we still had that sort of impact, and that's how, of course, how the coronavirus travels is through international travellers. So we definitely had that, and we definitely had a bunch of infections early on, but we shut down really in terms of the curve very, very quickly. But the curve flattened in Australia. The hospitals were barely affected by coronavirus patients. There were, like in the tens across Australia of people in like I'd look at the stats and there'd be like 20 or 30 people in Australia in intensive care units spread over all the hospitals. So they were easily able to cope with the more severe cases. We obviously have had deaths, and that's mostly in the aged care facilities, which has kind of been the experience. I think globally, where the majority of like 50% or more of the deaths, end up being for the elderly, because it disproportionately affects people sort of over 65. So that's been no different in Australia. We've had a period of lockdown, and we came out of that, and now Victoria, one of the southern state in Australia, has gone into lockdown again because they've had a bit of an explosion of infections. But we're worrying about infections. We're not worrying about deaths, right? So we're trying to
Right.
keep a lid on the infections to try and control the virus. So,
I
but
mean, very
yeah,
jealous of
so that
that. Like, I can't lie, right? Like you're like, oh man, one of our states has to lock, or one of our cities has to lock down. Over here, we're like, okay, this is great. But I want to talk a little bit logistics wise. What surprised you? Were there any trends or new processes that came out? Because for here, one of the thing that we all kind of really got excited about was the contactless delivery and contact like electronic bill of ladings, which you would think in 2020 was a normal thing that like most businesses went through, but there's still a lot of pen and paper places. Were there any trends that came out of this in logistics that you were surprised by?
um, so nothing I saw that really surprised me. There was certainly an impact on the global supply chain. Air freight became a super premium. Like air freight prices tripled because a lot of air freight travels in the belly of passenger aircraft, and passenger aircraft largely stopped and stopped completely for a while. There's still a few planes flying, but that meant that air freight cargo capacity was restricted to those businesses that had their own dedicated cargo fleet. So they still flew, and so the price, it was supply and demand, right? The price just went up, so that skyrocketed. So I don't know that I probably thought that would be an impact, but that definitely was something that was a little bit surprising. So that meant that either people had to bring things in at extraordinary prices, and so you saw imported hand sanitizer for $20 a bottle instead of $2 a bottle, and things like that. And toilet paper, we Australia became world famous because of the run on toilet paper. I don't think anyone was expecting that.
No idea why.
So I don't know whether you saw the video, Kyle, but there was a very famous video of two women fighting in a supermarket over someone who had a trolley full of toilet paper and someone else just wanted one pack, and they got into a big fight in the supermarket, and I think Australia became the laughing stock of the world. But then then it started happening in
Yeah.
other
Then
places.
then Florida said, "Hold my beer," and they're like, "We got this." Like Florida's going to take over everything for you guys. And I'm a Florida
Yeah.
man. I love it, but geez, yeah. But yeah, that's those. It sounds like a lot of like the sort of same stuff. What about processes? Like, especially the thing that's very interesting, like you say, the small to mid-sized businesses usually are the ones who get to do more of the new kind of technology and things like that. Did you guys see, or because of kind of the lightened, because you guys took care of it, did you guys see anything kind of come up like we did, where the contactless really became a big thing? And like, honestly, drivers, I mean, the most of our drivers in the US kind of are in that more demographic that kind of is affected by it. So we saw deliveries to hotspots becoming very difficult to happen.
Yeah, well, I guess we didn't have the hotspots, right? So that was one of the factors, and most of the deliveries that happen in Australia, there's very few people. In fact, probably there aren't any or barely any where people are signing a piece of paper anymore. There would be few where people would be signing sort of paper. Most of it is already, sign on glass on a terminal. So now they just take a picture or they just write your name down. So and they'll just drop it off at the doorstep or something for those personal deliveries. With businesses, there's not a lot of contact in those business deliveries anyway. But what really, I mean, the big impact in Australia was in the hospitality industry. Like, we have quite a big tourism industry, and obviously the restaurants and the clubs and the bars and all of those sort of social venues, all of that stuff just shut down. And of course, that impacted all the way up the supply chain. So all of the suppliers to those businesses were in deep, deep trouble because their market just simply disappeared. And the corresponding, as I mentioned in my videos, the corresponding movement in e-commerce, like that just exploded. And there were certainly businesses that were reporting huge spikes in their e-commerce. One of my clients is an online pharmacy business. So they just went ballistic, and they really struggled to handle the volume. So, and that is a problem for any business. So you get unexpected massive spikes in volume, and you're really not geared up for it. That becomes a real problem, right? And you get disappointed customers. But even online fashion businesses were going just fine. And you think, well, people are staying home, they're not going out. Why are they buying fashion? But they do. So maybe they're, I don't know if there's a boredom, let me just go online and,
Yep.
fulfill my shopping desires.
There 100% is. I can tell you for a fact. My wife, every day we were getting new. I'm like, how are we getting packages? Like, what are we getting this stuff? And they were always, I'm like, why are you buying stuff? Like, stop it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's fascinating. And I think the e-commerce was the big spike. It was something that we saw everywhere. That was a global thing. What did you see? Like, you talk about the rising to meet the challenges. What did a successful, like, small to mid-sized enterprise business that rose to the challenge, like, to reach e-commerce? What did they do? What did you notice? What were they being? How were they able to spot this?
So I think this caught people unawares, right? So that would be the number one thing. So the only way you're going to scale up to meet a sudden sort of spike in demand like that is usually simply by throwing labour at the problem. That's how most people respond, because their processes are what they are, and they try and scale up by throwing labour. And that's really where things start to fall apart, because you take a process that might work okay at low volume, and this might be like part of your process, right? So you've got something which you might do 100 times a day normally, and it's a manual process, and it's a bit clunky, and it's okay. But suddenly you've got to do that 500 times a day, and it becomes simply, it starts, and instead of having just one guy doing it, you've now got 3 new people, coming in to help that guy, and then it's 4 people, and it's like the productivity goes, down the toilet, because people's falling over themselves physically. The space is a problem, and and there's no time to automate. There's no time to put in systems, right? Once that demand is there, all you just got to service it. So the people who were best able to cope were the ones who already had efficient processes in place in their warehouse, and so could meet that demand, right, when it spiked. If your processes are already efficient and all you've got to do is add another terminal and spend, an hour training someone, and then they fall into the process and it just works, then you're able to cope with the demand, right? It doesn't mean it's necessarily easy to do it, but you can do it, right? You've got a system that is scalable. So my mantra, right, is all about scaling without stress. You're only going to do that through good process and through good systems that support efficient processes. So the thing things that the businesses that were a standout were the ones that were ready for that, right? That already had a process that was ready to scale. But I think many businesses are simply not in that situation, right? So they would have really struggled with the peak in demand, and they were probably simply just hiring extra staff and coping the best they could. But hopefully out of that, what people sort of realising is that you need to invest in the processes that are happening within your business in order to be efficient.
And ideally, they're also recognizing that, hey, your processes weren't good. The processes didn't work out. Like, that's the end of the day.
Exactly.
You
Yeah.
should have been paying attention to this. Is there
Yeah.
any, for the people listening out there, is there kind of a metric, some data points that they should kind of go out and look at to see, like, hey, did we rise, or is it going to be painfully obvious? Like, hey, you're going to know how much you struggled.
Yeah. Right? If you've had that volume peak, whether you've coped or not, right? So if you got through it and you got the orders out more or less on time, maybe a bit delayed, then I'd say, great, good job. You've probably got a pretty good set of scalable processes. But for the ones whose business fell over, then that indicates some serious underlying issues within the business that really needs to be addressed. So in a warehouse context, again, which is kind of my sort of specialty, it's, did you ship the orders today that you would have expected to ship? Did the orders simply go out the door? Now, once it gets into the freight world, that might be a different story, because if the carriers are flooded, they will obviously have exactly the same issue. They can't suddenly buy 20 or 30 more trucks. They can work them a bit more hours and things, but it's difficult to scale up a carrier in the same way that you can sort of throw some extra people into a warehouse process. So the number one measure that I would be looking at in a warehouse context is orders in versus orders out, right? So if you got 2,000 orders in today, did you get 2,000 orders out? Or did you only get 1,500 or 1,000, right? So if you normally get 500 or 1,000 orders a day sort of processing through your warehouse, and suddenly that jumps to 2,000, then what happened, right? Did they go out? And if they didn't go out today, did they go out tomorrow? How many days did they sit in your system before they went out? That would be the key thing that I would be looking at in terms of the performance within the warehouse, because that's the thing that's the measure of your customer service. The other issue too is that the orders may not go out simply because you've run out of stock, right? Or you don't have the stock to satisfy those orders. I mean, there's really sort of two key reasons. One, you had the stock, but you couldn't get the orders out. The other one is simply you couldn't get the stock in fast enough. And then that might be a problem in receiving, or it might be a supply chain issue where you simply don't have the supply. So loads of people were desperate for toilet paper and it simply wasn't there. Loads of people were desperate for hand sanitizer. For some reason, baking took off, right? Everyone was at home, so flour was in short supply. Everyone said, let's bake cakes and cookies and whatever, because I'm at home, and let's do that. So baking and home cooking. So, there were, and pasta, long life preserved products, pasta sauces and canned goods and things were flying off the shelves. If you run out, the suppliers run out and you can't get the supply, and if you've got an overseas supply chain, which might have months of lead time, I mean, that just creates a massive problem in the supply chain. The other thing too is the communication with the customer. What are you communicating to your customers when that sort of thing goes on? Do you just kind of like sit on the order and hope that the customer doesn't notice that they haven't got their order for 2 weeks, or do you actually actively communicate with them? I think you've got to bring customers along on the journey with that, and you've got to have really good and honest and open communication, so that you don't get people just cancelling after 2 weeks, or you deliver it and they go, no, I don't want it somewhere else, I don't want to take this back. I didn't realise that was still coming. So that whole customer service part is a really critical part of the actions that a business needs to be taking in order to be successful when you get these unusual supply and demand circumstances.
Oh, you absolutely have to. It's a weird personal story, but my wife's car, we recently had a baby, so we were both mom and dad brained constantly.
Congratulations.
And thanks. It's been fun. I'm surprised she's not screaming right now. But we somehow accidentally, her car got messed up. She left the sunroof open, downpour. It's summertime here in Massachusetts, so of course it's a rain thing. Soaks everything. We have to bring our car in to get fixed, and they spent 2 weeks with our car, and like we have a newborn, like we meant we were one car household, and like that kind of like
Yeah.
this stuff, and they wouldn't communicate with us. They wouldn't pick up the phone when we kept calling, like, where's our car? You said it would be like a few days. Finally I got someone on the phone, and they're like, oh, the part's not in. We're having delays on parts the whole time. And you're like, just tell me that. Like, I understand the world we live in. It's just communicate that, and like understand as a consumer, like as someone who needs their car. I'm like, I need the car. Like, we can't really do as much. We have to kind of be aware that we have a baby at home the whole time. But
Mm.
it's interesting, of like you say, the customer service thing's so important. I think the other thing that's really cool, and you talked about it in one of your videos I was watching, early, like in the middle of coronavirus, but availability trumped price and marketing when it came
Yeah.
to e-commerce. And it's like you said, like toilet paper, you didn't care, you just needed toilet paper. It's a behavior that is interesting, and it's sort of something that I think a lot of people are going to kind of revisit when this would, because of what happened, and especially because we've been in that more lean initiative approach. Do you think that there might be a hybrid approach to this, or how do you think some businesses are going to respond to the idea that, like, man, if I just had stock during this crisis, our business would be thriving right now?
Yeah. Look, I certainly spoke to at least one business where this was an opportunity, and I sort of mentioned this in the video, that you've got a if the thing that people want is out of stock, but you've got the old model, right? You've got that slow and obsolete stock where there's nothing else available now, right? So there's an opportunity there for you to actually sell that stock in, which under normal circumstances wouldn't sell, because we're spoiled, right? The 21st century, we are, killing it in terms of choice. You go back 100 years, and that would not have been the case, right? There would have been one version of a product from one supplier, and maybe that was in short supply because they couldn't make enough to meet demand, and you just had to wait, right? So, but we are spoiled for choice, and we are spoiled for supply and availability at the moment. But as soon as that looks like it's at risk, what do you see? You see hoarding and panic buying. And so you can actually, that can turn a normally functional supply chain into a dysfunctional one. So if you had toilet paper, you were going to sell it, and people were selling it at like, $10 a roll, and just ridiculous prices because there was like, they had 5 rolls. So they go, why not, right? Someone's going to buy it if they don't have toilet paper. So, and they did. So availability always, it's just that that's not normally something we're even aware of, unless you've got some like super in demand product where you've just got a lag before the manufacturing catches up with the supply. And some businesses deliberately engineer this into their sort of marketing programs. So they might have a pre-order, and then they have a sellout, right? And so there's no availability, and that just creates excitement and demand for that product sort of the next when it comes into stock. But that's an engineered shortage, right? There's almost no reason for anything to have a supply or availability issue now. In fact, we usually have the opposite problem, right, with too much supply, and then the new thing comes out, and all of that product is just, no one wants it anymore. So but when you get crisis, availability is where it's at, because people they need their toilet paper, right? Because they don't want to tear up newspaper or use gum leaves or any of the other
Right.
old-fashioned things that people might have had to cope with.
Yep. What about, so with the slobs, like you like to call them, which I love that. What's a true metric? So I think that a lot of people probably think that in their inventory they got these slow moving things, and like, we don't need this stuff. But what's a good metric that someone kind of, now that they dealt with an actual availability crisis on their hands, what do they do to measure sort of where their true slobs are in their inventory? What should they be looking at?
Yeah. So look, I think it really is important to look at your slow moving and potentially obsolete inventory. So slow moving inventory will pretty much present itself with very few sales over a period. So now that doesn't mean that it's not still an active product. It just means you don't sell it very much. So you have to manage that. So you've got a couple of choices to manage slow-moving inventory. You might just simply buy it to order. You might just go, look, you know what, I'm not going to stock that. When someone orders it, they just wait for a week, and I'll order it from the supplier and get it in and ship it to them. Perfectly legitimate strategy, because it just isn't worth having it sitting on your shelf going dusty. So you measure that simply by looking at the sales rate of that product, right? And then you make some key decisions about, yes, I need to have it so that it's available because it's a critical part of my service. And so that really is a service choice. Now, for the obsolete inventory, that's stuff that hasn't sold at all. And particularly, so if you have something that hasn't sold within, say, a 3-month period, that's certainly an initial alarm bell. If it hasn't sold in the past 6 months, that's, that definitely should be raising more alarm bells. If it hasn't sold in the last year, then it's probably no one wants it, and probably no one ever will. I certainly have one business that had a fairly honest accounting approach, and any inventory that had been sitting for 2 years, they simply wrote off the balance sheet. But there would be businesses sitting around with millions of dollars worth of obsolete inventory on their balance sheet and clogging up their warehouse that that's simply never going to sell. And they're just going, well, I've got it. Doesn't expire. It might be a physical product that doesn't age, but that doesn't mean that the demand is ever going to come back for that product. And I think you need to be honest. So when things start to age out, so if you've got something, no sales in 3 months, time to promote it, time to start looking at sort of other alternatives before that gets way too old, right? Now, it's different in different industries, and there would be some industries where maybe things that sell, 4 times a year, and so a 3-month no sale might be normal, right? So there's certainly there are always just in case kind of supply chains where you've got a spare part on the shelf and you have to have it. So there are legitimate reasons where you actually need to have that. But in a normal kind of, certainly a retail orientated business, if something hasn't sold for 3 months, you should be looking at how you're going to start moving that product along. The other sort of theme that I often talk about is the idea of a warehouse is like an apartment building, and your stock is like a tenant, right? So, and this is how you should certainly be thinking if you're a third-party logistics business. Your tenants need to pay you rent. So, stock in your warehouse that doesn't move is like a tenant in your apartment that is simply refusing to pay the rent. Because if it's moving, that means you're selling it and you're generating profit and sort of income from those products. So if you've got products that aren't moving, they aren't paying you rent, and you could put potentially something else in there. So there's an opportunity cost, and people never think about the opportunity cost in warehousing of having a warehouse full of dead stock, right? There is absolutely a real opportunity cost there, because you could have products in there that sell.
Yeah, no, I'm again thinking more personal stuff of like experiences I've had where companies I worked for had the same thing. And it was just an old product that they're like, well, we spent so much money to create this thing. And you're like, yeah, but you're missing out on it. I'm like, how about we try this? They're like, well, no, then we can't sell it like for what the cost of making it was. You're like, yeah, the opportunity. I love that idea of a tenant. It's a tenant. It's costing you money. So if they ain't paying rent, why keep it?
Exactly. Now, if you people experience this personally. If you go into your pantry, right? I don't know what your pantry is like, Carl, but I'm sure if you went to your pantry and you sort of dig towards the back of it, you're going to find expired stock, and you're going to go, you know what? There's a can of something that I bought that I thought I might, but I haven't used it. I remember I bought that 2 years ago for a particular dish that I never cooked. You're never going to cook it.
I threw away a jar of Nutella earlier today because I was like, why do we have this? We're not eating it. It expired 2 years ago. I'm like, this is gonna go. But totally get that. So switching here, just trying to transition a little bit into kind of start to get to the wrap up stage of this. But in terms of speed selling, we've seen sort of the e-commerce come in, like we've been discussing, and there's been really that accelerated e-commerce. There's a lot more speed to it than it ever was. What technology do you think is going to be vital to facilitate that acceleration within a warehouse? What did the warehouse need to have? And I think I know the answer because you've really been hinting at it, but talk to like someone who's never really understood a warehouse management or inventory management system. How does that assist in this, especially this new accelerated, fast-paced new normal we're all living in?
Okay, all right. So let's talk about kind of the stages of evolution that a business might go through, an e-commerce business might go through, right? So they're going to start off. They've got Shopify or Magento, or they've got some sort of a web store, and and an accounting package at the back. And Shopify and Xero is kind of like the two classic products that people are kind of, they're really dominating the market. But it could be anything, there's a bunch of them out there. So to start off with that, now that gives them almost nothing in terms of inventory management. They are not inventory management systems, or barely. Shopify has some sort of functionality. So essentially, people just have stuff in their warehouse. They have all the products that they're going to sell in their warehouse somewhere, arranged in some manner that allows them to physically find them. They simply print the orders from the back end of Shopify, and then they walk around the warehouse and they go find that stock. And typically what people do is they arrange things in family groups. So to pick any order, they're walking all over the warehouse, and a lot of the times they're walking around with just one pick slip at a time. So they go and they pick those couple of things for the order, bring it back, pack it up and do that. Then they go out again and do another pick and then bring that back. It's just, so that is the ultimate non-scalable process, right? Because it's just incredibly time consuming. So then what the typical route now is that people go, they'll add an inventory management system into that. So something like Deer Inventory or Sin7 or Unleashed, or there's a bunch of packages out there. Those are three probably the most commonly used ones. And then that will give them some additional functionality in terms of their order management and inventory management, which is good, but they are not very good at warehouse management. Now, they kind of say they are, but they're not great. Essentially, they might give you some batch picking, right? So you could do a batch pick, and that certainly is a useful thing to do. So instead of going one order at a time, you print out 10 orders in a batch and you pick those essentially just by item, and then you sort those orders when you come back to a desk, and you sort them to the individual orders. So batch picking is a huge jump over just picking one order at a time. But the next level, which is actually missing from most, certainly small and medium businesses, and even a lot of big businesses don't have warehouse management systems, but that next level in technology is going up to a warehouse management system. And what a warehouse system does is it's specifically designed to run your warehouse. So it gives you physical control over all of the inventory movements within the warehouse. And we've all seen the barcode scanners, right? So this is now, instead of having a piece of paper in your hand, you've got a smartphone or a smart terminal, smart device of some sort with a barcode scanner on it. And there's a bunch of different hardware solutions there, but they usually end up in the Android realm, some sort of an Android device with a barcode scanner on it. And now you've got location control over your stock. Instead of just walking around trying to find the product, the system will tell you exactly where to go to pick the products, and multiple locations, and it manages replenishment of pick faces. There's a whole bunch of really, really clever things that you can do, and very smart ways to manage multiple order picking in your warehouse once you go down the road of a warehouse management system. So they really amp up the technology and sophistication, and also the efficiency. And then this all ties into the other systems, right? So it ties into your carrier system, so it creates the consignments. So you get your freight labels out and you stick them on the box, and then all ready to go, once the carrier truck arrives for delivery. And then that ties then into your whole suite of other applications, and notifications being sent out to customers, inventory levels on your website, the whole kit and caboodle, right? This is where it really brings it all together. And that's what gives you the ultimately scalable process.
Yeah, no, that's I definitely had an aha moment when you sort of explained it. I mean, I've never really heard, because you think warehouse, you're like, oh yeah, maybe it helps with that, but the idea of like you're walking around smartly and it's a device that's telling like you to pick up the right things instead of here's a batch of 10 things that's sort of all in the same. It makes everything more efficient. You move so much faster. You can see exactly why that's so important, but you can also see why it's a difficult thing for most, like, to bring that level of sophistication. You definitely got to be ready for all that stuff. I think
Yeah. It's a jump, right? It's a jump in terms
right.
of sophistication,
It's steps,
and
right?
sophistication
Yeah.
brings complexity. Yeah.
Right. Like we deal with it a lot in terms of like visibility, right? A lot of people want to know visibility into their freight and their product and stuff like that. And then, like, people tout all the time, full visibility, easy, right out the box visibility, but it's steps. Like, you can't go from like I don't know where my product is until like I just don't have a customer yelling at to me to like I see it driving on the highway at a certain speed and I know what the temperature is in like the reefer van. Like, it just is so interesting of how many steps it takes, and how some companies love to say it's like boom, you can have it out the box, but it does take process, it does take time, and like you preach a lot of times, it's having the ability to scale without stress. which is where the big issue is. Starting to wrap up, one of the big important things, or the thing I think you really brought, like, gave me another aha moment, kind of reading your stuff, watching your stuff, was the future of the supply chain is going to be personal. I think that makes so much sense, especially after seeing it, right? It is
Yeah.
personal. It's like you say, it's the customer support and stuff. Where do you think it's gonna be felt the most in business?
So certainly retail, right? That is the big evolution we're going through at the moment. The evolution of retail from physical stores to personal delivery. I mean, we literally live in a world now where you can be lying in your hammock, shout out to Amazon Alexa, bring me some stuff, and then an hour later it arrives on your door, right? That is godlike power that we have built into our current supply chain. Speak and it will and make it so, right? And it can just happen. So that's kind of where we're at. But it's not just retail; it is also happening in B2B, and it has been happening in B2B for a while. So we saw the big change in a number of years ago now in corporate stationery deliveries. Right back in the olden days, you just had a stationery cupboard in the office floor, and everyone raided it. It's at back to school time every year for pens and notepads and things for the kids. and,
Absolutely did. Still, I
right?
still was doing
That's
it.
just what happened. So, it was just like a free shopping cart for people to buy stuff, and someone would, some supply person would just replenish it. And they didn't care. That's what happened. So to counteract that and to actually give people exactly what they need, we went to the delivery to desktop, and we had a business here, Corporate Express or Blue Star Office, and there's a bunch of them. I'm sure they're all in the US as well. So now those sort of things at a personal level, and we're seeing that now with uniforms and personal protective equipment, anything that an individual uses within a business has the potential to go down to the personal level. Obviously, the big bulky stuff, right, that's not happening, right? So if you're a manufacturer and you need bulk raw materials for your manufacturing operation, all of that traditional supply chain is like, that's not going anywhere. That is still it's going to stay the same because it's just fundamental to how things need to be done. But anything that is for the individual, whether it is in a retail or in a business context, is going to increasingly going to be delivered to at a personal level. Now, what that does in the supply chain, in the warehouse, is it makes everything much more complex, and it makes all of the processes within the warehouse much more labour intensive. So that's where again the technology, warehouse management systems or physical automation, right? Because let's not forget about robotics and automation, and there's a whole bunch of tools that are there as well. All of that is needed because a few years ago it was just put on a pallet and delivered to a store. Now it's got to be wrapped up with a whole bunch of other products, with a little ribbon on it and a personal note, and delivered to someone's house or someone's desk, within a business. It's just like it's the level of effort is so much harder. But the thing that is weird about that is that if you do that efficiently, it actually saves money because you don't have the stationery cupboard anymore. There's less waste in the overall system from doing that. So we just have to accept that is the way the world is going. That is what people want, and new supply chains are being forged to deliver that as efficiently as they possibly can. And I think there's still some way to go. I think that the future is we're going to see more crowdsourced freight, right? So particularly where anyone will just jump in their car and they'll do a few deliveries around the local neighbourhood in the evening. So we're going to see, and that's already happening now. But I think we're going to see more of that because people want to get deliveries when they're home, not sort of when they're at work. So all of this sort of revolution in the supply chain is going on right now, and people are building systems and processes and new businesses around supplying that need. And it's just going to get better and better and better, I think, over time.
Man, crowdsourced freight. It makes so much sense, the gig economy and
It's
stuff like that.
it's
But
Uber, right?
yeah, I know that here we've got Uber Freight, which is
Yeah.
essentially like, hey, trying to reduce those empty miles for the truck drivers and stuff. But I think, like you say, it's that white glove, like, at home service that it's gonna happen. It makes a ton of sense. I guess the last question I really have, and it's something that, like, I think you're gonna just knock out the park because this is kind of what you talk about a lot. But what should organizations be doing to future-proof their supply chain in this new normal? If there's one step that they can do, if they hear this and they're like, You know what? We survived it. We got through it, but this is a new world we're living in. What should they be doing to kind of get ready for all of it?
Uh, I think the cloud is the big trend in software. Like a few years ago, I'm like, but internet is patchy and unreliable, therefore you can't use the cloud. And what's the value? It just seems to be making software more expensive. So instead of buying it and kind of owning it, now you want me to pay for it every month. So it's like, man. But what was actually happening? The software business model was being destroyed because people were discounting the software so cheaply that it was there was no money in the software business anymore. So the legacy systems could kind of cope because they were getting maintenance fees and things, and they had a massive installed user base. So they were still making money. But for new entrants into the market, it just became ridiculous. But I think now what is actually very, very clear, the internet around the world is just getting better and better. So cloud becomes much more viable. People have kind of got over the security concerns, although those are still legitimate, right? So those are definitely still important. But what I think the cloud gives you is easy connectivity in a way that is just not possible with on-premises software. So, and by connectivity, I mean for business-to-business trading, because we talked about EDI and business trading years and years ago. But in the overwhelming majority of business-to-business transactions, I send you a PDF purchase order that got printed out of my ERP system. Someone keys it into an order entry system, right? Prints out a packing slip and goes and picks it from the warehouse, and then and people sign for it, right? That's how B2B works now. So what happened to EDI? Like, where's all the electronic trading? I mean, with big retailers, yes, that certainly happens in Australia, right? And I'm sure it's the same in the US.
Right.
But a whole host of it's like outside of retail, no, it's not there. So what the cloud does, if everyone was in the cloud, essentially you could do all of your electronic ordering and invoicing and all of that stuff. All of the paper just simply disappears from the system. The friction gets removed. So I think that the case for cloud software, that what's often kind of referred to as digital transformation within businesses generally, that's just getting increasingly compelling for everybody. And you're now seeing the big legacy systems all moving to the cloud, Oracle and NetSuite, and like that's where they're all the big systems now going there. I'm not sure about SAP. Big SAP is probably still an on-premises thing, and they connect that up. But I think that's where the future is. And for the little guy, for the small business, like I said before, that the ability for you to build a very sophisticated and connected ERP system, like business system, from your web store to your inventory management, warehouse management, carrier systems, CRMs and help desks and anything you can possibly think of, business reporting and technology. You put that set of applications together, yes, that will cost you now a bit of money on a monthly level, but you will have a more sophisticated business technology platform than most large businesses. So I just think that the case for moving to the cloud now is just a slam dunk, no brainer, and everybody needs to be there.
And it reacts too. I mean, it's smart. It's you see it everywhere. Like personally, I use the Adobe Cloud Suite for a lot of stuff and a lot of creation. And like when I first got it, it was sort of like, ah, crap, why are we subscription? But you just the new releases, like that type of stuff, it makes so much sense. Andrew, thanks so much for joining me, for you this morning and for me this afternoon. But this is a fantastic conversation. I'm so happy to have you join me.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. It was really interesting. I think we covered a lot of ground here, and there's a lot of very relevant stuff for businesses, for your audience and also for mine too. So,
absolutely. So how can people get in touch with you? What's the easiest way to kind of reach out to you if they have questions?
On the website, which is logisticshelp.com, and there's contact forms on the website. So that would be the number one thing. I'm also on LinkedIn, so you can look me up. Andrew J. Clark, the Logistics Linchpin, is my personal brand. So you'll certainly find me if you just punch in the Logistics Linchpin into LinkedIn. You'll find me, and I'm happy to connect with anyone who's listened to this podcast.
Absolutely, and I'll throw the link in the show notes. That way it's a very easy find and everything for him. So Andrew, have a good day.
Okay, thank you. And you have a good evening, Carl.
I will do. See ya.
All right, bye-bye.
And that's our show. Have a question for Andrew? Ask it in the comments section and we'll be sure to get an answer. In the meantime, subscribe and share our show. Thanks for watching Consulting Logistics. I'm Kyle MacNaught. Rock and roll.